All right, Tommy Tran with our GM Rick Spielman from With the First Pick, and we're talking about player comps for names projected to be taken within the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. So, Rick, let's start with a projection for Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas, with a guy who was former number 2 overall pick, Saquon Barkley with the Giants.
Yeah, and this is the easiest comparison I had. And I know a lot, Ryan Wilson, Pete Prisco, all those guys. This is an easy comparison to make because of his size, his speed, his ability to get into and out of cuts, his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's willing enough as a blocker and pass protection, and he has home run speed. So you see a lot of the similar traits that you've seen in Saquon Barkley when he came out. Why he's probably going to fall is because the position, not the player, but the position is probably devalued more than it was a few years ago.
All right, so Bijan Robinson, right away, our Ryan Wilson has him projected going to the Buffalo Bills, and we know that he needs a lot of help. Josh Allen in that offense. They did have Devin Singletary. They did get Nyheim Hines, sent Zach Moss the other way, but it'll be interesting to see if that does come to fruition and Bijan Robinson a fit out there in Buffalo. All right, next one is Jahmyr Gibbs, running back out of Alabama. Your comp for him is Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box of everybody comparing him to Alvin Kamara. And the reason I say this is not only his vision as a runner, his burst through the hole, his ability to make stop-start type cuts, very elusive in the open field. He has home run speed once he gets in the open field. But why I made this comparison was because of his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. And if you look at some of the things he did, especially in the Tennessee game, he made an incredible catch along the sideline. But you see here, once he gets in the open field, he has excellent speed, burst in vision, tough to tackle in the open field, great body control, and finish speed, which is, and he runs strong for a smaller back.
All right, so let's bring in your co-host of With the First Pick, Ryan Wilson, joining us here. So, Ryan, you got Bijan Robinson, a comp with Saquon Barkley that Rick has, and then also Gibbs with McCaffrey. What in agreement are you, if any, with the 2 player comps that Rick just laid out?
Yeah, Rick and I agree, and this is a rare thing, Tommy, so make a note that Saquon and Bijan feel like the same guy when you look at them physically. When you stand next to Saquon, he doesn't feel like he's 6'2", 230-ish, but he is. He feels thicker because he's obviously, he's a thick young man. And Bijan runs a little more upright, but he is almost as explosive. I don't want to say if he's just as explosive as Saquon, but he's incredibly explosive. The best running back in this draft class. Can actually make plays in the passing game as well. Wasn't asked to do a ton in blocking, but he can certainly do that. You're not drafting him in the first round to be a blocker. You're drafting for his explosive downfield plays. And then we talk about Jahmyr Gibbs, a player that Rick saw often last fall in Tuscaloosa, the transfer from Georgia Tech. He's nowhere near the size as Bijan. The Christian McCaffrey comp, I get. It makes Pete Prisco angry, and part of that is the fun of it. I like him more as Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook, and Rick and I have talked about this on the podcast. He's not as big as either of those players. Alvin Kamara was a 3rd rounder. Dalvin was a 2nd rounder. But I think that Jahmyr Gibbs has 1st-round talent. You see him there in the backfield. He's incredibly tough in small areas. He's a one-cut-and-go guy in space. You're not going to get a hand on him if you're the 2nd or 3rd level. There's no chance. And then you see him outrunning players. And that's 42 Drew Sanders, by the way, who's going to test incredibly well at the Combine next week. He'll probably be a 1st-round pick as well, that he's outrunning to the end zone. So I like the Dalvin Cook or Alvin Kamara comparisons a little better. But if you get a Christian McCaffrey-type talent out of Jahmyr Gibbs, that's clearly a home run, which is why I think that it's a long shot. But there may be a chance, if Bijan goes earlier in round 1, that the Jahmyr Gibbs makes his way into the bottom of the 1st round.
All right, so let's continue the player comp conversation where we get Rick's player comps, and then Ryan's going to kind of compare and whether he agrees or not. Let's go to wide receiver position. Now, Jordan Addison out of USC. A player comp is Devontae Smith for you, Rick.
Yeah, and because they both are similar in height, maybe 5'10", of 5'11", but they're very lean, wiry type builds, but they have excellent speed. They're excellent route runners. They're very good with the ball in their hand after the catch, very explosive playmakers. You see the open field speed when he does it's hard to track him down from behind. So I saw a lot of similarities in both their games and when Devontae Smith came out of Alabama.
Yeah, I like this, Rick, and I say Tommy, because Rick pushes back on everything I say. I went with Jalen Watt on this comp. but I like the Devonta Smith comp a little better. They're closer in size. They're probably closer in weight. Devonta Smith may end up being a little taller than Jordan Addison, but it's hard to find players at that size with that explosiveness that can beat you consistently at all three levels. We know Devonta Smith did it playing and play out at Alabama. He's had a lot of success early in his career in Philadelphia, and Jordan Addison is going to be that type of playmaker. For me, he probably falls somewhere in between Smith and Waddle in terms of playmaking ability at the next level. We know that Jordan Addison also has return ability, which will make him incredibly valuable. But the things he was able to accomplish last season with Caleb Williams at USC certainly get your attention. But he put up bigger numbers somehow the year before with Kenny Pickett at Pitt before he transferred out west. But the conversation is going to be this, guys. Who is going to be the first wide receiver taken? Is it going to be Quentin Johnson, a completely different body frame, or is it going to be Jordan Addison, who you know what you're getting out of him in that offense and in the offense with Kenny Pickett back in 2021?
It's interesting, Rick, because you said Jordan Addison, 5'10", 5'11". On our side, on many sites, has him at 6 flat. For his type of player position, does that matter, the extra inch there, in terms of his style and maybe selecting a player of his talent?
No, and when we're talking to Ryan here, Waddle is about 5'9". So, and Waddle is a thicker built guy, so that's why I couldn't understand that comparison. But everybody has their opinions on this show.
Certainly. RW did bring up Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver out of TCU. Your comp for him is a guy who could get paid pretty soon, T. Higgins.
Yeah, and I thought T. Higgins was very similar to him in what I saw on the tape. For a long, rangy guy, he has excellent speed. He can track the ball down the field. But what was impressive about him was his ability to get into and out of cuts. He can really drop his weight. He looks like a big receiver, but he has small receiver movement skills, and he has excellent run-after-catch ability. So you've seen him make a lot of explosive plays down the field. The one thing that he has to get a little bit more consistent in is just making sure he doesn't have some of those focus or concentration drops. A lot of times he will start running before he secures the ball, but that's easily cleaned up. So I see him not only as probably the highest ceiling in this draft, but also the #1 receiver going off the board.
Yeah, focus drops is the big issue for me too, Rick. And the funny thing is, like the T. Higgins comp I really like, Tommy. I won't tell you mine because I don't want to see Rick storm off the set in anger, which he often does on the podcast. But the reason I like the T. Higgins comp as it relates to Quentin Johnson is this. If you go back a few years during that draft that T. Higgins was in, he was a first-round talent all day long. And the draft media sort of talked themselves into thinking that T. Higgins wasn't going to be an explosive player because he didn't run a 4.45 and he didn't jump 45 inches or whatever. Thing is, he's a good football player. He was a good football player in college, and that showed up consistently when he arrived in the NFL. And we're starting to hear those sort of murmurs about Quentin Johnson. Is he a complete player? Are there concerns about his athleticism? And as Rick laid out, no. The answer is no. He consistently won one-on-ones. He's a huge catch radius guy. You can see him make plays at all three levels, which you don't often see from someone who's 6'4" and change. He can break tackles. He does everything you want your big wide receiver to do, especially if he's going to a team with a young quarterback who is more inclined to throw the ball up and let his players make plays. So I think in that regard, T. Higgins makes sense, and it makes sense in terms of the physicality and the measurements that we'll get for certain, Tommy. We'll see if he's actually 6'4" or 6'3.5" or 6'5" when we get to Indianapolis next week.
Yeah, we were hopeful to maybe see him showcase some of those skills in the national title game. It didn't happen, but again, as you guys know, talent evaluators and diehards know that one game does not make a difference in the tape, and his season certainly will speak for itself. Lastly here, we have Jackson Smith and Jigba out of Ohio State. And Rick, a comp that you have is a player that you get a lot of credit for in finding, and Adam Thielen out there with the Vikings.
Yeah, this one I want to, again, go outside the norm in thinking. And the reason I say that is because they're both very similar in size. The biggest question on these guys is their overall speed, and can they stretch the field down the field. What they can do is they're great route runners. They know how to get open in zone. They can get open down the field. What they use double moves because they're so refined as route runners, and they have excellent hands. Both of them catch the ball well over the middle of the field. They'll hang on when they take a hit. They have some run after catch skills, but they're not explosive speed type guys, but they know how to play the game, and both I think will be very, and Adam's been very productive, and I don't see why Smith and Jigba won't be.
Fun fact, Tommy, on last week's With the First Pick podcast, Rick went into great detail about how they found Adam Thielen. So check that out because he wasn't drafted, didn't get a combine invite, and he parlayed that into being a two-time Pro Bowler and a fantastic player still for the Minnesota Vikings. And I think the takeaway from Rick saying is that we don't know how fast Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be, right? He only played 3 games this year, only had 5 catches, but in Phoenix a few weeks ago at the Super Bowl, we had Garrett Wilson say straight up he was the best receiver on that 2021 Ohio State team that included first-rounders Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and future first-rounder Marvin Harrison Jr. So that gets your attention. He led the team in receiving that year. I think he led the team in receiving yards as well. He was virtually unstoppable. But how does that translate to the NFL? It's going to come down to what he weighs and not necessarily how big he is, but how fast is he? And hopefully we'll get a glimpse of that next week. He had a hamstring issue that limited him during the fall, but you would imagine he's probably close to 100%. But I think this is an interesting comp. It's a different comp and one we haven't seen, and I'm certainly fine with it, especially since we don't know how fast he is, but we'll find that out in just a few days.
All right, guys, good stuff. Sit tight. I want to remind everybody of the Pick Six podcast, which Ryan Wilson is a super friend. I mean, he's everywhere. He's doing more than one pod, and he's doing a bunch of HQ hits. It's that time of year. Host Will Brinson, John Breach as well. Scan that QR code and check out the Pick Six podcast, guys, even during the off season.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.